Is Navia better than Itto? Not the highest of bars, I have to admit, but here we are. But first and foremost, why am I analyzing Navia as a carry if in the past I said that in my opinion she is best used as a sub DPS? Truthfully, I still believe to this day that, just in theory, a team where she doesn't need to use her full string of normal attacks and she can just slot in to use her nuclear assembling elemental skills is the most fitting role for her. But practically that's not the easiest thing to do, because even as a sub DPS, the field time she'd require is not very simple to endure for most teams. Meanwhile, if you play her as a carry, it's much easier to justify her requiring upwards of 10 seconds of field time, because at that point you're building the team around her. Not only that, but when used as a carry, she also gains advantages that are directly tied to her kit. For one, since she'll be spending more time on field, that means she'll take more direct particles. For example, the ones generated by her elemental skill, which she will all get directly. Second, her normal attacks generating crystallizes will make it easier for her elemental skill to get the stacks it needs to deal a lot of damage. To be perfectly clear though, you don't need a full string of normal attacks to generate enough stacks to make the elemental skill strong, since, for example, the elemental burst will generate plenty in that sense. But having multiple windows of field time where Navia will generate enough geo application to create around 3 crystallizes does make the stacks generation much more consistent. Basically, while her design role might not be the one of a hyper carry, for example, there is a basis to create something promising here. Geo carries don't exactly have the most exciting track record so far, but what if I told you that Navia is different compared to somebody like Itto, for example? Let me remind you all that if you enjoy my content and my theory crafting, you can show your support by subscribing and leaving a thumbs up and also following me on Twitter. If there is a problem I always had with Itto, it's his inflexibility. This is both due to his kit and due to how MiHoYo has decided to structure the geo element in the past. Specifically, high energy requirements combined with a defensive scaling kit and charge attack based damage really minimize the amount of characters Itto can fit with. However, specifically wanted Itto to fit with Goro and a mono geo structure, while with Navia they're doing something completely different. She is a character that has sort of a quick swap nature and will also scale through attack, and on top of that will also deal on-field damage through normal attacks, so these 3 facts alone make her much more versatile than Itto. It is kind of a shame, I guess, that they abandoned the idea of mono geo, but it does make her more promising this way. So, to give you an example of how Navia carry rotations would work in practice, let me show you a real team. A baseline offensive core that fits pretty well with any carry that scales off attack is the double Pyro combination of Bennett and Xianling. It is hardly ever the best option for most carries in the game, but for a geo unit that doesn't synergize well with anemo units, for example, double Pyro does serve a useful purpose. As the 4th slot, let's say Zhongli for now, for example, to enable the geo resonance consistently. Before I speak about any numbers, let's take a look at the rotation. Navia is technically a unit that can deal a big chunk of damage in short windows and then go field to allow other units on the team to do something else. This is what we call quick swap structure, and just theoretically this would allow 2 different units to share field time and deal on-field damage. However, nothing of the sort is happening here, since neither Bennett nor Xianling or even Zhongli needs any field time to deal damage. I remember a funny thing that Zajef said when we were talking about Navia in the last podcast we made with Justern, and what he said was basically, what Navia needs is another Navia. If there was somehow another character just like Navia that could do a serious damage in 5 seconds or so, you could basically alternate these 2 units to play a split carry team, a dual carry team. But there aren't really units that both synergize with Navia and can also do that, so for the time being she just fits on teams that don't fully utilize this quick swap nature of hers. Luckily though, Navia has 2 elemental skill charges, which means she can use her elemental skill twice in quick succession without waiting for the cooldown to end. As a reminder, each skill usage will enable a 4 seconds long window where Navia can use geo-infused normal attacks, so using two of them within a 10 seconds long window will enable Navia to deal geo-infused damage for the whole time. This resembles the normal functioning of most carries and makes Navia much less awkward to slot in on most teams. So regarding the mono Pyro team, it performs quite well in terms of team DPS, and Navia is pulling a lot of weight. Most of her damage will still be coming from her elemental skills, which will hit opponents for huge numbers in single instances, meaning you'll see a lot of scenarios where you just press skill and the opponent disappears. Truth be told, Navia's flexibility in terms of rotation does come in handy for a team like this that includes Xiangling, because it just creates a situation where you can battery her more with Bennett. Xiangling's energy requirements are still pretty high nonetheless, but trust me, it could be much worse. The more serious issue is probably the fact that Zhongli's pillar, the elemental skill, is kind of unreliable in terms of hitting components and as a result in terms of generating particles for Navia, and this can really make her energy requirements fluctuate. If you consider a scenario where only half of the pulses hit the opponents, Navia will already need an energy recharge stance on this team, and considering that there are also situations where Zhongli's pillar is basically a non-factor like against bosses, the scenario gets even worse. Alternatively, there is the version with Albedo who can replace Zhongli on this team and deal much more damage than him naturally, while also generating particles more consistently. On the other hand, on this variant you do lose Geo-Resonance consistency since it's tied to having a shield, and with Albedo on team, the only thing that will activate that are the crystallite shields that aren't very durable. They will only last a hit for the most part. Technically, Albedo can also be replaced by somebody like Ningyang, but we're reaching the bottom of the iceberg here, honestly. Generally, all variants have pros and cons. With Zhongli, you also have more consistency in terms of Navia damage if you use Serpent Spine on her, since getting hit will lose you stacks, and with Zhongli you minimize that risk. So probably that to me is the best composition in theory, although it depends, I guess. However, the key part here is that this Navia variant outperforms mono Geo Itto teams by a lot in terms of team DPS. It is theoretical since it's team DPS, but the margin is enough for me to call the Navia team better. While Itto isn't exactly hard to surpass nowadays, it is a bit surprising for Navia to beat him by so much, considering that the potential over Kate is not completely fulfilled on this type of team, in my opinion. And it's good to remember that while this Itto Mono Geo team can vary in terms of the 4th slot, in that you can put characters like Yelan or Furina instead of Albedo, for example, the structure of the team is mostly set in stone. On the other hand, Navia is much more flexible since she doesn't have particular restrictions. For example, another option would be just using her on a hyper team with Bennett, Zhongli, and one between Furina and Yelan. The Furina variant is a bit tricky because remember, you have Bennett here who is not the best healer in a team-wide sense, but Navia being as flexible as she is allows you to swap between characters and distribute Bennett's on-field healing that way. Despite that, if you don't play perfectly, you will probably have serious issues in terms of HP in the long run, which means fewer stacks from Furina's burst and fewer stacks for the elemental skill of Furina, which is why I prefer the Yelan team. While in the best case scenario the Furina team is better, the Yelan team is much more consistent for little damage loss. Again, even in this scenario you can potentially replace Zhongli with somebody like Albedo or even Ningyang. The team is flexible. Overall, both these two variants are similar in damage output to the double Pyro team I analyzed before, which is pretty good since it was a good team DPS value. Alternatively, you can do something like Navia Driver for the double Hydro core of Furina and Yelan, and Jean as a team-wide healer with also Resistance Shred for Hydro. By all means, not a Hyper team, because Navia's damage will take a huge hit in this scenario where you basically don't have Geo-Resonance or Bennett. Still, she will deal nice damage since both Yelan and Furina will buffer in terms of damage bonus. As a baseline, Navia's damage is quite high, probably because she is Geo and they needed to compensate for that handicap. So even in a scenario where she's clearly not the main focus of the team damage, she will still hit opponents quite hard. It's worth mentioning that in a scenario like this, you can even use the Petra artifact set on Navia to buff the Hydro damage bonus even more on the team, but it's seemingly not a gain in terms of team damage, team DPS, although it's pretty similar to the more offensive version of Navia. In general, this is the team that has performed the best out of my calculations in terms of team-wide damage, which is not a surprise because the double Hydro core is just busted and Navia just fits in because any unit can fit in here. But yeah, the point is that Navia can fit on a wide array of teams because she is pretty good as a carry and she is very flexible. But now that we put the Itto comparison to sleep, how good is she as a carry in a general sense? My early prediction based on my current calculations and how I think she will play in practice is that she will be decent. The team DPS is quite solid, it puts her in range of characters like Grizzly for the most part, but what I'm afraid of in this regard is that most of her damage will be single target based. Specifically, her most damaging ability, the elemental skill, will suffer in multi-opponent scenarios in ways other characters just don't. It is not necessarily a detriment to be a single target locked character, especially if your damage is very high, but for Navia, it's not really the case. She is kinda average to decent in terms of damage, and the ways she can output this damage is not especially impressive. It might sound like I'm being a bit harsh here, but remember, we got characters like Neuvillette recently who can match and surpass Navia in terms of team DPS and deal a lot of that damage in an AoE sense that Navia simply can't replicate. So overall, as a carry, she will be fine, but probably not top tier by any means.